Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, what if Jaden McDaniels takes another leap in his game this year? What if he becomes a more productive offensive player? What does that look like? Plus, we'll talk about another Exhibit 10 signing for the Timberwolves. Jaedon LeDee signs a contract, and also comments about the Wolves by Bill Simmons and Zach Lowe on the Simmons podcast. My thoughts on that. It's all coming. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beacon. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Happy Thursday, everybody. Hopefully you've had a fantastic week so far. The Timberwolves have made yet another signing, another training camp signing, a name that should look familiar if you paid attention this summer. We'll talk about that next segment. We'll also get to some Zach Lowe, Bill Simmons, Timberwolves thoughts toward the end of the show. As always, I agree with a lot of it, but then there's also some stuff in there that, like, what are they, especially Simmons, like, what's he talking about? We'll get to that later, but I want to start with another what if. It is what if week after all. Monday and Wednesday shows, we spent a lot of time on some big what ifs related to the team and some individual players. Today, it's all about Jaden McDaniels. We'll start there today. What if his game takes a leap this year offensively? What would that look like? First, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. All right. Let's talk about Jaden McDaniels. So, in order to talk about what a Jaden McDaniels leap looks like, we have to talk about where he's been, where he's come from, if you will, and how he's evolved over the first four seasons of his NBA career. Remember, coming out of Washington, he was a one-and-done player. And a lot of people thought he had lottery talent. Like the first half of that season, people were like, is he a top 10 pick? They got into Pac-12 play, and things were not as smooth for Jaden McDaniels. He had, I think he led the conference in technical fouls, and it just like, he just didn't put it all together. So the Wolves getting him in the 20s was seen by many people as a big steal. And it was really clear immediately why people thought that. All the tools were there defensively. I still think he was kind of a, averagey defender his first year and a half or so in the NBA. But again, he looks the part because of his length. He plays hard. That the motor doesn't really stop, even if the expression never changes. And that all was very apparent early, but he was so raw offensively. And I want to focus mostly on his offense here today, because we already know what he is defensively, right? He was all NBA defensive second team this year. He is one of the premier perimeter defenders in the league, premier help side block shot blockers in the league, although that number's ticked down slightly over the past couple of years. But I want to focus more on the offense here today, because there's no question what he provides defensively. And in my mind, I think he regressed a little offensively this year. And I'll explain what I mean by that. The evolution of Jaden McDaniels as an NBA player offensively went like this. As a rookie, it felt like he was just catching and like, I'm either going to pump fake, shots out there, I'm going to swing it, or I'm going to catch, pump fake, and then shoot a tougher three. Like, instead of taking the easy three, a lot of times it'd be a contested three. And sure enough, more than half his shot attempts as a rookie were 3-point shots. And this is a guy who only was like 33% at Washington in his single season there. But he shot 36% from outside the arc as a rookie, which was about league average that season. So like he was like right at league average. So it worked out pretty well, but I thought he made things a little bit too difficult on himself, because that's all it was. It was like he would just kind of catch panic. The game was too fast. It was either, pump fake, dribble into nothing and kick it to somebody else, pump fake into a tougher shot, or maybe catch and shoot and shoot a semi-open 3-point shot. That's what it was rookie season. The second year, it was the same thing, except for he was letting go of too many of those difficult contested jumpers, both threes and also long twos. He shot more 2-pointers in his second season. The 3-point shot was not as good because he was taking more difficult ones, and he was under 32% from outside the arc. And I thought he really struggled offensively in his second season. The third year is when he really things started to click. It was the same thing, but he was letting fly the open shots, And he was also trying to get to the basket. We saw the free throw rate tick up to over 0.2 his third season, which a free throw rate of 0.2 means for every field goal attempt he shoots, he attempts 0.2 free throws. So for every 5 field goal attempts, he's getting a free throw. Not bad for a guy who's a relatively low usage player on a team with Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns, and in that season, at that point, also Rudy Gobert. That was also the year when Karl-Anthony Towns missed 60-plus games with the calf injury. So there was a little bit more to work with for Jaden. He got a few more opportunities, and he was a bit more aggressive putting the ball on the floor, trying to get all the way to the basket. So he picked his spots with the three-point shot, and sure enough, he ends up shooting 39.8% from outside the arc in his third season. So 40% from three. He shot almost 59% on twos, and he got to the line almost 3 times per 100 possessions and shot 74% at the line. It was a well-rounded offensive season, and it gave me hope that he could fulfill, like it was before that season when Chris Finch, like kind of sacrilegious, but like mentioned Scottie Pippen as somebody who Jaden McDaniels, there were some similarities there, right? Could he be Scottie to Ance Jordan, which is obviously like, we've taken this a few levels too far already, but like that was kind of the idea. Is like, could he do all these things? Could he be a super athletic, defense first, kind of complementary offensive player? Nowhere near what Scottie could do with putting the ball on the floor. Like, I'm going to stop that comparison right now, but that was kind of the idea. Is like, could he just be this big forward who's defense first, can do a lot of different things offensively, be athletic, handle the basketball, knock down threes when he's open, etc. But then year 3 to year 4, he lost his confidence shooting threes at some point along the way. And what ended up happening wasn't like he actually got to the rim less often last season than he did the year before. Like he shot almost about 29% of his shot attempts within 3 feet of the basket 2 years ago. Last year, just 22%. When he got to the rim, the shot was actually a little bit better, but he wasn't drawing as many fouls. His overall average distance of his shot attempt was back up last year, but it's not because he shot that many more threes. He shot slightly more, but it was because he was shooting more of those weird, like, they're not exactly like, they actually look a little bit like when Kevin Durant shoots a fadeaway jumper, except for a lot of the times, like Jaden's not backing anybody down and then shooting an impossible turnaround like Kevin Garnett or Kevin Durant. It's more a drive that he stops and shoots almost like a Dirk. It's like a combo Kevin Durant Dirk. It's not a full one-legged fadeaway, but like this really difficult shot where he puts the ball back above his head and he makes it at a decent clip. The problem is you have to make it at an outstanding clip to make that shot worthwhile. And that crept into his repertoire a bit too much last year. We saw him shoot a total of about 34, almost 35% of his shots from between 3 and 16 feet. The year prior, it was right around 30%. So that ticked up, between, it was like 6-7% more shots from that range and about 6%, 7% less shots at the rim. 3-pointers went up slightly, but he didn't shoot them nearly as well. He was back to 34% from 3. So, by the way, this is a bit of an aside, and this is part of like, what does this look like if you find some consistency? His 3-point percentages for his career, 36%, 32%. So here, if you're watching on YouTube, I'll make a little line chart. 36%, 32%, 40%, 34%. So he's been all over the map, and there hasn't been any sort of a pattern. The line graph is up and down. The chart is up and down. What does that look like this year? I do think the types of shots he's getting have varied too, from the catless Timberwolves team to as a rookie when it was just kind of panic 3-pointers. And then last year, I thought he was getting pretty good looks. He just wasn't knocking them down, and he somewhat lost his confidence. He ended up shooting the ball fairly well from deep in the playoffs, but along the way during the season, there was some confidence loss there, and it just wasn't quite the same. And he dribbled himself into too many difficult fadeaway jumpers that he maybe made a few too many of them to make him irrationally confident about them. So what does that look like this year? Well, he's got to stop taking so many of those short mid-range fadeaway type jumpers. I think the process is still much better than it was his first 2 seasons. Clearly, it all makes sense to him. He gets it. He generally knows what to do with the ball in his hands, but he's either got to finish that play by getting to the basket or just kick it out to somebody else. Stop taking those when they've got talent like Anthony Edwards, Karl-Anthony Towns, and this year they'll have Rob Dillingham and Naz Reid and these guys who like are knockdown 3-point shooters or just better overall offensive players, more polished offensive players than Jaden McDaniels. Taking a weird 9-foot fadeaway is not helpful. If he can eliminate that, knock down open threes at a clip we know he can, maybe he's not 40%. Maybe that's the outlier and he's right around league average. Fine. It's better than last year. If he's league average from 3, can get to the line a little bit like he did 2 years ago, and play that complementary kind of fourth option role in the half court, he becomes a plus offensive player. Like a leap, when I say leap for Jaden McDaniels, maybe I should have started here. It doesn't mean an all-star. However, if he were to somehow average 15 and 5 with a couple of blocks per game and shoot 39% from three with how good he is defensively, there'd be people talking about him as an all-star. I mean, 2 years ago, he averaged 12 and 4 with a block a game and shot 40% from three. Like, if we're talking that, but a little bit better in his age 24, age 25 seasons, that's completely reasonable. So a leap for Jaden McDaniels isn't an ant-like leap. It's a leap from an outstanding defensive player who's a net negative on offense to a net positive on offense and still an outstanding defensive player. And if that happens, I don't see how anybody has a better starting five than the Timberwolves. Now, obviously, Mike Conley's old, and that would be the question mark. But like defensive player of the year, 2 All-Stars and former All-NBA players in Ant and Karl-Anthony Towns, and an all-defensive player who's a plus offensive player, that's a outstanding starting five. And a Jaden McDaniels that's playing confidently. I remember last year, Chris Finch would always, actually 2 years ago, he started calling Jaden McDaniels a barometer for the Timberwolves offense. If he's going well, the Timberwolves offense is going well. I always thought he overplayed that a little bit, and he would say it usually after Jaden had a great game or a terrible game. But if he's knocking down those open corner threes and he's making smart decisions with the ball in his hands, he can have something of a breakout, a Jaden breakout offensively, which again, isn't 25 a game. It's like 15 a game with league average 3-point shooting and heady plays on offense, not dribbling into trouble and shooting really difficult fadeaway jumpers would be the key there. All right. Let's talk about the Timberwolves' newest signing. A player that we talked about this summer is officially coming to the Wolves training camp with an Exhibit 10 deal. We'll talk about that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. It's outstanding Gametime as you can get any sort of event. It's not just sports either. My wife and I will go to concerts, we'll go to comedy shows, we'll go to theater, both here where we live. And then also when we're traveling, Gametime is the best place to find all of those different types of events. Whatever you like to attend, you can find it at Gametime. You can find the best seats there and the best deals there as well. If you toggle in the all-in pricing feature too, by the way, you can get your total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. Again, just toggle on all-in pricing, and it's the best way to view your total price. Plus, you can check out the panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy with the seat views option. The lowest price guarantee means that Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference if you find a better price elsewhere. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. Big thank you once again for making Locked On Wolves your first listen of the day. Of course, for your second listen, go check out the Locked On NBA podcast. There's no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA. Available on YouTube or wherever you get podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. All right, so the Timberwolves on Wednesday, it was reported by Michael Scott of Hoops Hype, who broke the last couple of Timberwolves signings, that they had signed Jaedon LeDee, who, of course, finished his college career at San Diego State, actually won like the best power forward in college basketball award last year, the Karl Malone Award. He was a second-team All-American, really, really good last season for San Diego State. The catch is he's an undersized power forward who's already 25 years old, which is why he went undrafted. He wasn't even invited to the NBA Combine. If the name sounds familiar, it's because he played on the Timberwolves Summer League entry, although he only played 10 minutes a game in the Summer League. He was relatively underutilized. And I really liked him. I spent a little bit of time previewing him back in, very early July heading into Summer League play. The way my one-liner on him was he's an undersized power forward, was a knack for the ball, and he's a fantastic rebounder. Digging a bit deeper, if you look at all of the numbers from what Jaedon LeDee did in college, so he started at Ohio State, played there for 1 season, played 2 years at TCU, sat out a year, then played 2 seasons at San Diego State. So he played 6 years in college. And even 2 years ago, like his fourth season, first year at San Diego State, he came off the bench, only averaged 8 and 5. Then as a fifth year senior, he averaged 21 and 8 and shot 44% from outside the arc. Now it's low volume on the 3-pointer. So, don't get too excited about that. The shot is very clunky. It doesn't look like it should go in regularly. He's not a perimeter jump shooter, but he was actually pretty good in the mid-range. That's not the point here. That's not where I want to focus. I just wanted to explain, like, this dude scored 22 a game, but that's not what his game is. He's obviously a really good rebounder, as you might expect for an undersized power forward. I already described him as having a nose for the ball. But what's most exciting is his nose for the ball defensively. He had a steal rate of 2.2%. And he had a block rate of, let's see where to go, a block rate of 1.9%. It was much higher early in the season. For his career in college, overall, a 2.3% block rate, which is really good for an undersized power forward. I would describe him as, let's see, what type of almost like a Brandon Clark kind of, what's the name that I'm blanking on? Almost like a Kenneth Reid like body type. Maybe not quite that big, but that's sort of a body type with the defensive profile of somebody like a Josh Minot. Now, he's not as good of a perimeter defender as Josh Minot, but in terms of nose for the ball, I always talk about the steal rate, the block rate, the rebound rate. All of the above are very impressive for Jaedon LeDee. And the really only red flag is an aggressive way to say it, but the only concern is he's 6'9", so he's a little small, 25 already, and he's not a super athlete. He's not as athletic as Kenneth Reid was, for instance, coming out of college, out of Morehead State. He's an okay athlete. He's not a great perimeter defender, and he could try a little too hard offensively. We talked already, his usage rate was over 30% at San Diego State, but they were obviously a really good team as far as SDSU teams go, and he was good offensively, but he's not going to produce a whole lot offensively at the NBA level. His calling card is going to be as an energy guy who can grab you some steals and blocks and dunks in transition, offensive rebounds. That's what he's going to provide. He doesn't actually foul that much defensively he's such a good team defender and off-ball defender. I think that's really where he's going to be more helpful. You're not going to put him on an elite offensive player in the perimeter. You're going to kind of try and hide him, let him play free safety, pick some passes off, get some weak side blocks, and he draws free throws on the offensive side. Again, undersized, can shoot from the elbows, can shoot from the mid-range a little bit like Kenneth Reid. Again, that type of a player. So there's a time and a place for those players. And I think he actually has a shot at making an NBA roster as a bit player, a fringe rotation type guy. A reminder that the Exhibit 10 contract, what that means is he's going to come to training camp with the Wolves, assuming he does not make the team, because there's no, it's not a standard contract. If he doesn't make the team, he gets a bonus of like $78,000 to stay with the Iowa Wolves. If he stays there for 2 months, he gets that bonus. So very, very likely he ends up with the Iowa Wolves, and he's like one of 4 guys that they've recently brought in to do that. The others are, I'm going to see if I can, Eugene Omoruyi, who we talked about the other day. He's a Exhibit 10 guy. Skylar Mays, they both played in the NBA last year. Mays with Portland and the Lakers, Omoruyi with the Wizards last year, but he'd been around the Thunder, etc. So those are both experienced NBA players who will be on Exhibit 10 deals. And we talked about Chasen Lee a couple of weeks ago. He also signed an Exhibit 10 deal. So they've got 4 guys now, and they're at the roster limit of 21 total. If you talk about standard roster guys, non-guaranteed guys, which is really just PJ Dozier, your 3 two-way contracts, and then these 4 Exhibit 10 guys, that's a full roster. I think what we'll do is I'll do a show at some point in the next week or two leading into training camp, previewing the non-roster guys, who's got the best shot. I like Omoruyi is probably Omoruyi is how you say it. He's probably the most intriguing in terms of plug and play, like plus upside, like what could he provide? Jaedon LeDee is also intriguing because I think it's a skill set that's always valuable. Even if he's not a focal point on either end of the floor, those guys with the do stuff ability, who's going to play hard all the time. Now, in theory, Josh Minot and Leonard Miller can provide that too, and they're obviously on NBA standard contracts, and we're draft picks, and the Wolves are going to give them opportunities more likely before Jaedon LeDee. But perhaps Jaedon LeDee. Somebody like LeDee, though, could push those guys, could push those players in that do stuff role, in that ancillary, 10th, 11th, 12th man role, where when you're on the court, you got to make stuff happen. And if Jaedon LeDee can do that, if he could push Minot and Leonard Miller, then that I think would be a benefit for the Timberwolves, and that's perhaps partly what the front office is thinking. So, an intriguing Exhibit 10 signing. Anytime you can bring in a guy who won the his position Player of the Year last year, was an All-American, averaged 25 a game, you do it, and there's no risk here, right? He very likely ends up with the Iowa Wolves and has a crazy year with the G League next year. That would be my guess. Is he's the star of the Iowa Wolves come fall and winter. All right, I want to close by giving my reaction to the Timberwolves comments, or the comments about the Timberwolves, by Zach Lowe, who is on the Bill Simmons podcast on the Ringer Podcast Network, and my thoughts on their thoughts coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our title sponsors at FanDuel. You've heard me talk a lot about FanDuel over the years here at Locked On Wolves. That's because it's America's #1 sportsbook. Well, they have something a little different for you right now. Now through this Sunday, the 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment you can cancel at any time. Again, now through this coming Sunday, it's a full slate of games this Sunday, some really good ones on the schedule. If you're a FanDuel customer, all you got to do is bet $5. You'll get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. And if you have that YouTube TV base plan, you can watch every single regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. Just use your Google account and a current form of payment you can cancel at any time. Just visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook today. All right, so Zach Lowe of ESPN went on the Bill Simmons podcast on the Ringer Podcast Network, and talked about their biggest, how do they call it? Or what did they call it? The biggest concerns, maybe? I'm going to pull up the exact wording here. Biggest 24-25 NBA concerns. And they talk about a number of stuff. They actually start with Milwaukee and Denver. A lot of Denver talk and concerns for Denver this year. They talk about Embiid's health. They talk about the Grizzlies and John Morant, a little bit about the Pelicans, some other stuff mixed in there. They eventually get to the Timberwolves, and to be fair, they were like 8th or 9th on the list of concerns. Zach Lowe even said before and during and kind of after he talked about the Wolves, Lowe said, like, I'm not as worried about them actually as I am the Suns, or I am, he listed a couple other things, the Heat, for instance, but he said, I wanted to talk about the Timberwolves, so I bumped them up on the list. And I'm paraphrasing now, so go listen to it. But Zach Lowe said effectively, there's a lot of little things with the Timberwolves, and it feels weird for a team that went to the conference finals and has an ascending young star like Anthony Edwards. It's weird that there's so many little concerns kind of surrounding the team. And he didn't even mention the ownership stuff. He talked about, only having a top 7 that he really trusts. I'll give my thoughts on that here in a second. Relying on a lottery pick and Rob Dillingham, the Gobert stuff with France in the Olympics, and the what we've talked about on the show, all the different NBA stars trolling him in various ways on social media and their podcasts and all that stuff. And it was funny because, like, and he also mentioned Karl-Anthony Towns and just kind of the ups and downs of Cap, but he didn't even really mention didn't even really mention, like, I don't know. There wasn't any like real concrete concern. It was just kind of like a, weird situation, which I would agree with, because he doesn't mention the ownership. He doesn't mention that Chris Finch broke his leg broke his patella or whatever in the playoffs and coached from behind the bench. Like, there's a lot of weird stuff that happened in the last year for the Wolves. There always is. And the ownership stuff pending, coming up in November, December, those hearings, that's weird. To which then Simmons agreed, and then said his exact quote, I believe, was, is Gobert playable anymore? Which I think I laughed out loud when he said that. Like, just because he injured a finger and France decided they would rather play Lasor over him in, some semifinal game. Like, it doesn't mean Rudy Gobert, who just won the Defensive Player of the Year last season, is not playable. You can think they gave up too much for Rudy Gobert. That's fine, but you can't think that the defending Defensive Player of the Year is not playable. Like it's just a completely asinine comment. And I think a lot of what I agree actually with a lot of what Simmons does. I actually think he's not. I think he's pretty good as overall as a basketball analysis. But occasionally there's these takes that become a little too hot, like that. It's like for a second I thought I was listening to Shaq talk about Rudy Gobert. Like Rudy Gobert, the Timberwolves would not hide him in these situations, late game situations. They won 56 games last year. Yeah, Luka Doncic and Zach Lowe mentioned Luka hitting the three over Gobert in the playoffs. I think it was game 2 to win that game. Yeah, Luka hits shots over everybody. I talked about that not that long ago. I think when I was defending Gobert after the one of those people ripping on him on podcasts and stuff. Like, show me a player that Luka hasn't hit a step back three over. What's he supposed to do 30 feet from the basket? Like, I don't know. I don't know how to respond to that. Like, obviously Rudy Gobert is playable. He's not matchup dependent. They may clearly what happened against Dallas was the Timberwolves I blame the coaching staff for the plan to defend the Luka Doncic pick and roll and just say, hey, we're just going to keep dropping and keep dropping and keep dropping. Like that, you got to adjust faster than that. You got to do something different. If it's blitzing the ball out of his hands, which they tried a little bit of, if it's switching, which they clearly did. And like the Gobert example, that didn't work. But Gobert on an island is better than basically every other center in the league on an island, except for maybe Bam or Wemby, right? I thought that was a crazy comment. Now, related to Zach Lowe's comment about the Timberwolves bench only trusting like the top 7. Well, one of the two guys off the bench is the reigning 6th man of the year, Naz Reid, and the other one is Nickeil Alexander-Walker, everybody likes. And Rob Dillingham, well, he's a question mark. There's a ton of upside there. Arguably the best offensive player in this draft. And Joe Ingles shot 43% from 3 last year. And yeah, he's old and he can only do so much, but like, I don't think he's going to be overall. I don't think his impact will be less than Kyle Anderson's from last year. So it's a little bit unique that this is a team that went to the conference finals and will be relying on 2 first-round picks in Dillingham and Terrence Shannon Jr. at the end of the rotation. That is a bit unique, but I don't know that I don't think you could discount how good the starting 5 is and how good the top 7 is. And again, another way of saying this is they returned 7 of the top 8, which like Denver didn't do after their championship season. And like teams aren't often able to keep the band together when it comes to their main rotation. And I thought the Wolves did a pretty good job of doing that this offseason, given all the constraints they had. Now, again, full disclosure here. Like I thought overall they were fair because they both said that they thought they were favorites to be in the top 4. And both of them said like had them in their top 6, like avoiding the play-in, like very clearly no major concerns. And what I would say is like, look at the rest of the West. Like whose bench do you trust in the Western Conference? Do you trust this makeshift, I don't know, like Golden State bench? Certainly not Denver's bench. Dallas's bench, obviously they got to the finals. You got to respect it. I mean, OKC would be the obvious one. That's who everybody loves. The bench should be good there. Certainly, Phoenix, no. I don't know, Sacramento, Memphis, like who's got a better bench than Minnesota? That would be my counter there is who's top, who's 6 through 9 guys do you feel better than Naz Reid, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Rob Dillingham, and Joe Ingles / Terrence Shannon Jr. Like who's better? There might be 1 or 2 better benches. I just don't understand what, like, compared to who. Like their bench is not good enough compared to whose bench. Like that to me would be the follow-up there. So I thought that overall the comments were fair, but it felt like we're grasping at straws just to kind of decide that the Wolves are in some way in peril, which seemed unnecessary, but I guess I appreciated the effort to go out of the way and talk about the Wolves. Well, it is a unique situation. You could also look at it as like, hey, they had less turnover than basically any of these teams we just talked about that I just rattled off. So anyway, good listen overall. I thought the interview was good. I thought the conversation was good. And there's a lot of teams that are in much worse shape than the Timberwolves. Obviously, they both love Anthony Edwards. So it was a fun listen. All right, that's all we got for you today here on the show. We'll be back tomorrow on Friday for the completion of What If Week. And then next week, like we're gearing up for media day. We're gearing up for training camp. It's all up on the horizon here. We're like, I want to say 3 weeks from Friday is the first preseason game. Is that right? Hang on. I've got it right here. 2 weeks from Friday is the first preseason game. 2 weeks from Friday. We are, depending on when you're listening to this, 14 or 15 days away from Timberwolves basketball. Like that's happening very shortly here. So get excited. A lot coming up here on the show as well. Again, we'll be back tomorrow on Friday. A big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every single day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. Wherever you like to listen to podcasts, you can find Locked On Wolves. You could also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. And you can follow on X at Locked On T-Wolves and also at B Beacon with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. A big thank you again for making us your first listen. Now, for your second listen, go find the Locked On NBA show, where the local experts keep you updated on all the biggest storylines ahead of the season. Find Locked On NBA on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beacon. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.